Again, welcome to King's Bible Baptist College. This is Old Testament Survey Part 2. And here we're going to be covering from the divided kingdom all the way through the rest of the Old Testament. Now, first of all, tell me, what are some of the highlights that interest you last semester that you really liked? Anything particular?
Like for me, learning about the basically the dinosaurs did since during the biblical time. I think that's always been a question in my mind, and even people have asked the question, but I never knew truly how to answer it. I never really studied it. So with that coming out, that was a blessing for me just to go understand it.
And the thing is, even in Bibles today, you'll hear people say, like when it's describing Leviathan and Behemoth, they say, well, this could be a alligator or this could be an elephant. Well, when it talks about strength is in his navel and his legs are like cedar, that certainly doesn't necessarily fit an alligator. That he drinks up the Nile, that he's the chief of God's creation. Or then where it talks about his tail's like a cedar, well, that definitely doesn't fit an elephant. Crocodile tail's bigger, but it's like even in some Bible comments, it's like they're trying to mesh with the world on what the world says. Oh, the dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. Yesterday, after I got back from church, I watched a flood documentary on, I don't know, anybody ever watched Tubi? It's a free movie TV app, right? And it's, of course, it's not a Christian, they may have some Christian movies on there, some Christian films, but, when I start watching it, they had like professors from Harvard and Southern California, and I kind of figured that probably wasn't going to be the most conservative view, but I like watching them and listening to them, seeing what they say, and how, of course, sometimes on what they don't say. They say this and this and this, like the Gilgamesh story. That they say, well, it was written long before the Bible was ever written. Well, the copy we have could be older than the Bibles we have, but it comes from a story. There's hundreds of flood legends all over the world, and they say, well, Gilgamesh was written long before the Bible. Well, when you read a lot of these flood creation stories or flood stories, a lot of them don't make what we would call sense. Like, there was a window on top of the ark in the boat, or it was on the back of a turtle, and the reason the flood came because the gods were angry because the people were too noisy and they couldn't sleep. That's a god that couldn't sleep because people down here on earth was making too much noise. So and I said, well, yeah, the reason there's stories all over the world is because people remember what happened. They remember, hey, there was a big flood, and as time goes on, we'll see that in our this semester, how people just forgot about God. They didn't want to know about God. And so even Romans talk about when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, but became vain in their imaginations, and foolish hearts were darkened. So in other words, because they don't want to listen to God's creation, God's laws, God's rules, they blank them out. And I don't know if you've ever seen having children, you talk to them, and especially when they're little. I was talking to my one granddaughter the other day, and I called her name, and she was like, she was upset because my daughter was ready to leave the house, and she didn't want to leave. I go, smile, Brianna, smile. And she's just, you'd think she couldn't hear you. But because she didn't want to hear her mom says, time to go, she was acting like she couldn't hear it. So, Any other thing stands out to you? Any other thing in particular?
I really enjoy learning about the false philosophies. I'd never heard of them before. I found them very interesting.
And you can, once you start seeing some of this stuff, you'll see how a lot of it fits into the world's view. It's like, I heard a preacher one time say, it's like this. It's like, okay, you pick up your glasses, if you have glasses, you have glasses, you got your glasses right there. You pick up your glasses and you look through a lens. Now, I sort of have fishing glasses that has a very deep polarization on it and reflect. So when I wear it, if it's real sunny out, if I put them on, till I broke them, I could be out when you know how you get that light shining on any time. Well, it was really good. But if I walked inside, everything was like, okay, I can't hardly see when I walk inside a building. So a lot depends on what lens you look through, and we as believers want to look through the Bible and put everything through the Bible. We see what we've covered so far in our last semester. We've covered the first 5 books of the Bible, the law, which is part of history also. We did all the poetry, and we did about half of the history. So if you look from like 1 Kings down through Esther, and then all the blue side over here, that's what we still have to go through. So we're going to go through the history, and part of your quiz next week, I'll tell you what the quiz is going to be next week. It's going to be 10 questions, and it's going to be the first 10 northern kings of Israel. So, and I'll text it out to you too. So I'll say who was the first king, like Jeroboam. Who was the next king, and who was the third king of Israel? Who was the fourth king? And when I say Israel, now we're looking at the divided kingdoms. So when I say Israel, we're talking about the northern kingdoms. And when I say Judah, or the southern kingdom, we're talking about the kings of the bottom, Judah and Benjamin. So, and we'll see, and of course, how many are like me sometimes? When I first started reading the Bible, especially when I got to Chronicles and Kings. Anybody look at Chronicles lately? The first Chronicles lately. Well, if you look at First Chronicles, basically it's 9 chapters of genealogies. And many times when people get to Leviticus or Chronicles, it's like either they just skip over it or speed read it. And I heard one preacher, he started reading the genealogies in Matthew, and he said, David begat such and such, and David begat, and they kept begatting all the way through to the other page. Now, it doesn't mean a lot to us, per se, when we think about it, but how many people here have ever had their genealogical records done? I should bring it into you one time. I should show you. My brother, he had a big, almost like a parchment paper. He went all the way back on one side, all the way back to William the Conqueror, who eventually became, the King of England. And so, as growing up as kids, how many ever watched the old Richard Green Robin Hood on TV, old black and white? I don't know if you remember that one. But anyways, hey, we always want to be like Robin Hood, right? Well, King John was the bad guy, right? Bad King John. Well, he's our kid. So we got the bad guy, but they had some good ones in there too. But if I could bring it out and I say, well, look at this. Hey, I'm related to this person. Here we're part of the Sons of the Revolution or whatever, right? And the reason, but sometimes my father-in-law, he'll send me, he still gets online and reads his paper from up in New York. So I'll hear things like, hey, such and such died. I have no idea who he's talking about. So I'm not the super most interested in it. Now, if he said, hey, did you hear about Jerry Falwell passed away? I came here to Liberty. I used to clean his office down at Old Town Gospire. When I hear that, oh, I have a connection there. So what I want to do is try to give you a connection of the people in the Bible. And you got to remember, when we'll go through this in a minute, but we can basically break down the time of Israel into 4 500 periods. We got 2000 to 1500 BC. You have the patriarchs from Abraham all the way through to when they came out of Egypt. So basically, they weren't a nation quite yet. They were becoming a nation when they were leaving Egypt. And they were ruled by the patriarchs. Like Abraham was in charge of his big crew, his one son. Well, 2 sons, and then later, more sons later, through Keturah. But it was ruled by the patriarchs. So if you want to and these aren't exact numbers, but it gives you, hey, if I can remember 400 or 500 periods, 2000 to 115 to 1500 patriarchs, from 1500 to 1000, you had the prophets, starting with Moses all the way through Samuel. Now remember we said Samuel was the last of the prophets, and the first of the prophets and last of the judges. We can look at that as the periods of the prophets, where the prophets ruled. And then, what did Samuel do? He anointed Saul, and he anointed David. So, from 1000 BC to 500 BC, basically you have where the kings ruled. Under Saul, David, and Solomon, you have the United Kingdom. Most of this 500-year period is going to be by the divided kingdoms, where you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And then from where the Old Testament closes, well, roughly 400 something, but you have 500 BC down to the time of Christ. You have when the priests ruled, like Josiah, he was a priest. You had the Sanhedrin in the time of Christ. Of course, they were sort of controlled by the Romans or the Greeks, whoever was over top of their country, but it was basically a priesthood again. And again, we have our area of interest. Now, where are you guys from originally? Here?
Here.
Matt, you from here?
I was born and raised in Lynchburg.
Now, I was wearing a Pittsburgh Steeler hat today, right? So, I didn't know you're a Pittsburgh fan. I said, well, I grew up a half hour outside of Pittsburgh. So, if some of you remember Lynn Swan, Elsie Greenwood, Mean Joe Green, Franco Harris, Jack Lambert, that was my team I grew up with. And my high school was the largest high school in the area. And so, I got to see them play my teachers every year for a long time, a benefit game of basketball. So they would come and play our teachers, and every year they won. Because we had some teachers who were pretty good at sports, but that wasn't like professional football players. And Lynn Swan was my hero. He was about my height, and he made catching balls look graceful. And here I found out he studied ballet too. So, and I said, hey, it showed when he played on the field. He just made it look easy. So we have our area of interest. You remember that Abraham started down here. He came up there where his father died. They came in down in Canaan, and then they went to Egypt. That's a 500-year period. Then from Egypt through the desert into the promised land, wandering, and then into the promised land and becoming a nation, all the way through till Saul, another 500 years. And then from 1000 BC to 500 BC roughly, you have the United Kingdom, and then it divides, and you see right here, you have Damascus, Syria, Jordan, Hebron. You have the divided kingdom and all the nations around them. We learned, and we'll learn especially about Babylon and Assyria during this time, but you have also the immediate nations right around them. And we're going to see in some of these prophets and some prophecy and some preaching where most of these kingdoms will be condemned at one time, where he says, "Woe unto you, Edom." And if you remember from last semester, I talked about Edom. Anybody remember the capital of Edom? If you look at that yellow one down there, you'll see the mark right there? Petra. And if you ever watched I'm trying to remember the Indiana Jones movie, the Holy Grail one, whatever that one was, where they ride through that canyon and you look and you see this big building, that's Petra. That was the kingdom, and you could see why it would be such easy to defend. And we're going to hear about the prophecy. Our time period that we're basically going to cover tonight, we're not going to hit all this, but we're going to go from 931, the divided kingdom. Now, what do you remember about the year 931? Matt?
Solomon died.
Solomon died,
and Rehoboam and Jeroboam.
right? I said you can take one date and remember three people with it. Solomon died, his son Rehoboam, the real Boam, and then Jeroboam, the Joker Boam, who split the kingdom and became kings in 931 when Solomon died. So basically we're going to cover all this, all the way to Lamentations, and that's the last book that will cover the chaotic kingdom, right? That Lamentations Jeremiah was written before, during, and after the Babylonian captivity. Lamentations was written afterwards. It's a prophet weeping for his nation. Jeremiah is the prophet preaching to his nation, trying to get him to repent and tell him judgment's coming. Be ready. Here's basically what the United Kingdom is going to look like. You have the Northern Kingdom. You had 19 kings. 19 kings in the Northern Kingdom. And in the Southern Kingdom, you have 19 kings plus one queen, Athaliah, who took over, killed all of her children, and I gather step-granny. She killed all the royal seed. Some were probably her children, and some were probably children by, usually kings in those days had concubines and many wives. So some of those weren't her kids, but knowing she was the daughter of Jezebel, I wouldn't be surprised if all of them were her kids and she still killed them. After her one son, she killed all the grandkids because she wanted to take control. And she got her heredity from her mother, Jezebel. So you can see what kind of lady she was. And I basically put them all in order. We're going to look at like Obadiah preaching to Edom, Joel, and we're going to go right down through these nations eventually, and we'll see who's northern kingdoms, who's preaching to the southern kingdom, and who's preaching to the nations around them. So if you see right there that Assyrian captivity, 721, see all these prophets right below it? Since Israel's in captivity now, you know all those prophets are preaching to the southern kingdom, Judah. So once you see Assyria and Israel captive, you'll know the rest all fits with the south. Here's our kingdom. So you got your first ruler of the northern kingdom, Jeroboam, all the way through Hosea, and that's not the prophet Hosea. And one thing about this semester, there's a lot of names used multiple times. We're going to have a Jehoiarim and a Joram. It's the same name. It's just, it can be pronounced both ways. And you have a king in the north, a Joram, and a king in the south. And they both basically ruled near the same time. And one was the other one's uncle. So if you say, boy, that's confusing. Well, yes, it can be. Because I know first time I read through it, it's like, wait a minute, I thought they said that was the northern king. And then I read it again. Oh, he was king of Judah. Then I read it again. Here it says he was the king of Israel. And then you find out, like Herods. You got Herod Agrippa, Herod the Great, Herod Antipas. You had all these Herods in the New Testament. And, you got Joshua, the one who led Israel into the Canaan land. And you have the Joshua of the priest and governor that comes back when Israel returns to the land. So you have multiple names, and you'll see a lot of J names, because Jehovah starts with J, so you'll hear a lot of Jehovah or Eli, or it's like some of the Muslims. You'll hear Ali, Muhammad. You'll hear a lot of the similar sounding names. And northern Israel was a nation for 210 years. The southern kingdom, it begins with Rehoboam, and it ends with Zechariah. And we're going to see how you had basically 8 saved kings out of all of them. All the northern kings were bad. Most of the southern kings were bad. You had some good, some in between, sometimes. They started out good and finished bad. Think of Solomon. He had so much potential. I mean, he was blessed by God. God said, hey, ask what you want. He said, give me wisdom. I mean, he had wisdom, he had wealth, and for the wisest man who ever lived, he did some foolish things. Sometimes we can have, I can give Chris good advice, but then sometimes I don't take my own advice, right? I don't know if you ever seen that. Hey, my uncle, he would always give advice like that. He wouldn't take it himself, but he would give it to me. So we have, again, the chaotic kingdom. And what I want you to do is on the first class, or for the next week, for the quiz, I want you to learn Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Eli, Zimri, Omri, Ahab. Let me count 10 on them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All the way, we'll tell you what, we'll stop at Jehoram. Because Jehu was a new dynasty. So we'll do Jeroboam to Jehoram. 9. We'll do 9 this first, and then we'll do 10 next week. My goal is, when the semester's over, that you'll be able to name all the kings of Israel and all the kings of Judah in order. So I figured, hey, give you 10, give you 9, 10 for quizzes, and that way it'll help you memorize them. And you don't have to know the dates. If you want to know the dates, the important dates in this semester are 9/31, and then we're going to go 7/21 when Israel, and see Hosea up in the northern kingdom here. No, that kingdom ended at 7/21, and you'll get people who give different dates, 7/21, 7/22. The problem is the Jewish calendar is about halfway through our calendar. So it doesn't break evenly, like it doesn't end in December like ours does. So you'll get different dates. But basically you want 9/31 for both kingdoms starting, and we're going to do where Assyria took Israel, the northern kingdom, into captivity, 7/21. And then we're also going to learn, for this section right here, we're also going to learn the captivity, 605, 597, and 587. Yeah. 586, sorry, 586. So we're going to look at the 3 Babylonian captivities, where Daniel was taken in the first exile, Ezekiel the second, and the third one is when they wiped out Jerusalem. So we won't cover that tonight, but that's where we're headed towards. Try to give you some of these important dates that you can basically hang your hat on. Here's a basic outline of 1 Kings. You have the United Kingdoms, chapter 1 through 11, and you have King Solomon. He was the United Kingdom. So we covered that last semester, and we're picking up on 1 Kings chapter 12 through Chronicles, and this is where the divided kingdom starts. Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12, and then you have Rehoboam and Jeroboam, chapter 12, 13, and 14. And this is, you don't have to remember these dates, but I just figured I'd give you an outline. And this is, it shows you could break it down if you want to break it down by kings. This is how you would break it down. And I didn't mark on here who was the north and who was the south. So basically, you have a list of kings and some of the things that happened during their reign. 2 Kings. This was, now remember, whenever last semester I mentioned, Kings was originally one book. You had Samuel one book, Kings one book, Chronicles one book. Kings was written shortly after the captivity, probably by Jeremiah possibly. So Kings was written right after the captivity, and it's written with a prophetic view. In other words, anytime you see prophets in the Bible, typically think something's going wrong. like I don't know if your boss. I had a boss. He said, Barry, he didn't know much about my job, right? He said, Barry, as long as I'm not hearing any issues, you just keep running the way you want to. So the only time I saw him is when there was some issue coming up. Whether it's something I did, one of my guys did, or something he wanted to do that he wanted to change. So basically, he was a hands-off. So remember, when you see prophets in the Bible, think there's sin in the camp. There's problems. And so they were preaching. And remember, you have a prophet. What is a prophet? He's not just a future teller. He's a current teller. He preached to his people of his day, many times with a message that would go on down the road too. So whenever they talk about the latter kingdom, the latter days, he wasn't just preaching to the future. Many times it was usually to try to get the attention of the crowd he was preaching to. And it typically was the kings or the people, the leaders of the group. So remember, when we look at Kings and Chronicles, we have similarities, we have differences, we have additions, we have exceptions. Like, you'll see why is it so closely related? And we're going to look at that. We're going to just look at the brief outline, so I want to show you how different they are. First Chronicles, it was written shortly after the return, when the Jews were coming back. And remember last, I think it was in church I preached this, but the captivity was a small group coming back from Persia. They'd been through the 70 years of captivity with the Babylonians. The Medo-Persians had conquered Babylon, and Cyrus. And he was written 200 years before this in the prophecy of Isaiah. He said, hey, he called him my servant, my shepherd. He said, he made an edict say, hey, any Jews that want to can return. So we're looking at a small group of people, of Jews, that are returning to try to rebuild their land. So, and it's written from a priestly view. He wasn't so much concerned about the negative, he was concerned about the worship. So think of this way, when you read Kings, you're usually going to hear more negative stuff. When you read Chronicles, you're going to read more encouraging stuff. Because Ezra is preaching to a group that needs encouragement. Remember, that if I said, how many people here can quote a verse from Chronicles? Any verse from Chronicles? The Chronicles is not a popular scripture memory verse.
2 Chronicles 7:14.
14, yep.
My people will...
If my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face. Encouraging, right? He said, hey, if my people, now remember, he's writing to a group that's going back. They're living the fulfillment that Solomon prayed to God. Remember when Solomon in chapter 9 and 10, he prayed whenever they were dedicating the temple? And he said, hey, when we sin and you take us away, when you punish us, if my people, our people, your people, God, pray, turning towards this holy temple, and of course now the temple's gone, it's been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Said, but if those, and remember Daniel, what did he do? He prayed toward Jerusalem. The temple's no longer there, but he still prayed towards Jerusalem, towards the temple. And eventually, God brought him back. And we're going to see that it took all those years to get idol worship out of the Jews. Now, they still didn't have everything right, but after the captivity, they never had an issue worshiping false idols, like Baal and Dagon and Molech and Ashtar and all them. Now, they didn't always live right for God, but you think of it this way. Babylon is the mystery religion. You look at Babylon in Genesis, in Revelation, saying it's the mother of harlots. God took them to the most pagan, idolatry land to get the idols out of them. Sometimes God does it a little differently than we might, right? I mean, have you ever thought about that? He takes them to the most idolatrous country around, and that's where they stop worshiping idols. So, First Chronicles. Remember I said the differences? It's the genealogies, first 9 chapters. Ezra was a priest. He had no concern for the treacherous Israel. You don't see any genealogies of any northern kings here. Ezra is a priest. He's concerned only with the line of David. Even though the throne was gone, the city was laid in ruins, Ezra was showing his people that God's still faithful. David's line is still there through Josiah. And he's showing them how, hey, God's faithful. No matter, we went through all this captivity, and now God's using a heathen Gentile, Cyrus, to bring us back, to bless us. And if you remember, what was the last book in the Hebrew Scripture? Chronicles. So imagine you're a Jew, and let's say, Tim, say you're a Jew, and I give you a Bible, and you're a friend of mine, and you say, well, I'll read it. And you really love the Old Testament, because it's like yours, maybe divided up a little different. And then you pins and needles, you turn it, you just finished reading Chronicles, the genealogy of the Messiah. And what does Matthew open up with? The genealogies of Jesus Christ, showing that Jesus has the right and will be the king that one day will be the anointed one. Think about that. It puts it right in there, and a Jew might, wow. And you see why they're so interested in the genealogies. Hey, God's faithful, God's faithful. And where does it start off? Joseph, the son of David. Mary was the son of David. Through different, one was Solomon, and Mary through Nathan. And it just shows you, he ends the Old Testament in a genealogy, and he starts the New Testament out with a genealogy. So, we see the history of David, 10 through 29. Chapter 10 is the death of Saul. David's rise to power. So the rest of this will be covered. The rest of Chronicles cover mostly. It gives you the genealogies and the life of Saul and David. A little bit, and it doesn't give you much. And remember, I said Chronicles is more encouraging, more positive. Chronicles doesn't mention anything about Absalom's rebellion. It doesn't mention one line about David and Bathsheba, David's big failure. He's not interested in David's failure. He's interested in God's promise to David. And he tells, and David was always there. And as we look at the divided kingdom, we're going to have two names, basically, two names. If I'm a king of Judah, I'm going to be measured. My measuring rod is, I did like unto David, or I didn't do like David. If I'm a northern king, you can forget it. Everyone's bad. He said, he did like unto Jeroboam, who caused Israel to sin. And out of all how would you like your name to be remembered as, you caused Israel to sin? You caused Israel to sin. There's only one king that's mentioned worse, and that was Ahab. He said he did more to cause, basically to get God's wrath than any other king, before and after. And I think his wife had a lot to do with that, Jezebel. Here's the outline of 2 Chronicles. You have the first 9 chapters is Solomon, and then you got chapters 10 through 36. That's the histories of the kings of Judah. It mentions some of the northern kings, but it doesn't give much detail about the northern kings. So when you're reading them, you think, okay, that's both kingdoms intermixed. Chronicles is more, they're concerned with the southern kingdom. And then you have the division of the kingdoms, 10 through 11. And then you have 11 where it picks up Rehoboam all the way through Jehoshaphat in verses 5 through 20. And then chapter 11 to the end of the book, basically, it's Jehoram and to the fall of Jerusalem. And this is Jehoram that is the king of the southern kingdom. You have a Jehoram that's in the northern kingdom too. And then finally where Cyrus says you can return. And he did that for a lot of his people that he conquered. He said, hey, you can worship the gods you want. You can go back home if you want, as long as you obey me and pay taxes. Some people say he was the first national humanitarian. Like, okay, just because you don't worship like me, no big deal. As long as you listen to the rules I make, you're fine. Where some of them you had, like Nebuchadnezzar, you had to bow down to him. Or, and Ahab, they had problems with Baal worship before, but Ahab, through Jezebel, made it institute as a national religion. And so that's why he caused it. Now, here's how they fit in. Now, if you look here, some of these dates don't exactly match every date in your book. And when we look at them, some of them overlap. Like Chris, you're king right now, and so you don't want to have a bad transition, so you name your son king before you die, and so he's co-regent with you. And you thought you were sick and only going to live a year, and you wound up living another 40 years. So he was like second in charge for 40 years. So some of the years overlap, and some are the same year where you have one was like, just a few days as king and burned himself up in his palace. And so, and this, if you look here, this is the basically dates and how they fit into the Bible. And I tried to put them in order, like Elijah and Elisha, Israel. And have you ever noticed Elijah? You remember the story with Elijah when he was, after he had his great Mount Carmel experience, he defeated all the priests of Baal, right? What happens? He comes down, and Jezebel says, well, your head's going to be like theirs tomorrow. And then he runs. I mean, he stood up to the king and all those people and all those prophets, fiery, and then he runs from a woman. So it just shows you her attitude. He was probably one of the first national henpecked husbands, And but he was ready to quit, wasn't he? He was in the cave. What are you doing here, Elijah? Well, I was very jealous for you, God. And look at me now. I'm no better than my fathers. I'm ready to give up. And remember, he had to be quiet for a while and hear the still small voice of God. And what did God do? Told him, go pick out a prophet. Go get your successor, Elisha. Now, you know, it's interesting. Where did he find Elisha? Anybody remember the story? He was farming. Do you remember, or have you read, that they had a school of prophets back then, started by Samuel, right? He didn't pick any of the trained seminary students. He picked a farmer. You know, God can use anyone. He wasn't trained in the school of prophecy. He was just living a day job, working, trying to serve God as best he could. And Elijah comes along, throws his mantle on him. Hey, he knew what that meant. He said, well, let me say goodbye to my dad and mom. What did I do? Why did I pick you? No. So he goes out and kills his oxen, chops up his plow, sacrifices him, you know, like peace offering where he's sharing the food with everybody, and he runs and follows Elijah. And at the end of Elijah's ministry, he said, hey, give me a double portion. And we see that he received it from God, and he did twice as many miracles as Elisha. And most of his were more quiet miracles. He wasn't so much the public person. So this just gives you a layout of how the rest of the books of the Bible fit. You see where it goes from 931 up there, where Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And down at the end, you see 430 with Malachi, the last prophet in the Bible. So let's look at some of the rulers here. We're going to start with Jeroboam. He was a king of the north. He was originally a servant of Solomon, and he was a goodly man. So he was sharp, probably strong, had it all together. And God told him, because Solomon loved many women and didn't serve me like he should, I'm going to rend the kingdom out of his hand. Well, evidently, some of that news got back to Solomon. Now, you remember when Saul found out that David was going to be the king? What did Saul try to do to David? Try to kill him. Well, what did Jeroboam do? He took off to Egypt. He took off. He got out of Israel, Judah, the United Kingdom back then. And then after Solomon died, he comes back. He's an Ephraimite. He gets the tribes together. They come here and they go to Rehoboam. Say, hey, Ray. Yeah, Jay. Hey, Ray. Said, hey, can you? Your dad was a good king. I mean, we really grew. You know, we really grew Israel. We became a great nation. He was rich, but those taxes, man, those taxes are just too much. Could you lighten the burden a little bit? I mean, cut it down to like 30% instead of 40% or whatever. Well, I don't know what percentage he was taxing them at. And he said, well, let me think about it. So he goes to his counselor. He goes to his father's counselor. He said, so hey guys, this is the deal. This whippersnapper out there, he said he wanted me to cut back on taxes. Now, you know, I'm a party guy. You know, guys, and I need that money. You know, my buddy and I, we have to go party, right? You know, so give me, you know, so just remember that when you give me your advice. They said, well, you should lighten the burden. Yeah, if you serve them now, they'll serve you forever. Right? Okay. Now let me go talk to my counselors, my buddies. And so he goes over to his buddies, his age. Hey guys, what do you think? Hey, well, I wouldn't put up with that. Tell them that your father's thigh is not as big as your little finger. And so they said your father's whipped us. Tell him I'll whip him with scorpions. You know, so the younger guys, they gave him the advice of just show him how tough you are, Rehoboam. So Rehoboam comes back. Well, guys, I'm going to increase your taxes. I'm going to make more burdens on you. And what do the Jews do, the Israel? Hey, what do we have in David? Now, if you remember going through some of the Bible and the Judges, some of the tribes didn't always see eye to eye. Remember the Ephraimites, they would come when Gideon had his victory. How come you didn't call us? Well, you did a lot more than we did. Okay. So they were always tension. They sort of didn't want to give up their rule. And now David Saul, they united under Saul for a little while. Then it split after he died, and you had David and Saul's son. And then finally David united the kingdom after 7 years. And he expanded Israel to its greatest size. He was the ideal king, the warrior king, the godly king that all the southern kings are going to be measured by. And what do we see? They left. And he goes back. He said, okay, I'm going to fix it. He sends over a man and says, hey, go get the taxes. And they stone him when he goes to get the taxes. And what happened? Rehoboam was going to grab an army and send them up, and the prophet comes out and says, hey, no. God did this because your father, because of his making all these idols. God said he was going to do it, so the kingdom's divided now. So what do we see? He was a cabinet member. He was a servant to Solomon, but he fled to Egypt. He led the revolt. They made him king, and he was an Ephraimite. So Ephraim was the biggest northern tribe. So you'll see a lot of the rulers from Israel will be from Ephraim. He put his capital in Shechem. What do you remember about Shechem? Anybody remember anything about Shechem? Where do we see Shechem first in the Bible? It's in Genesis. Anybody remember? Well, I'll give you one of the hints I'm looking for. Jacob had a daughter, Dinah, and they stopped in Shechem for a while. What happened to her? She was out with the other girls from Shechem, and she was raped by Shechem, Hamor's son, and then he wanted to marry her. Then what happened? Her brothers were upset. The dad was going to make a deal with Hiram, the king, and he said, okay, we'll become one people as long as you get circumcised. And so after they got circumcised, and the third day when they were in most pain, Simon and Levi came in and killed all the men and carried off the goods. And if you remember, Shechem, they've unearthed burial remains in Shechem. Everyone had some type of venereal disease. So it was a wicked place. And Jacob almost settled there. That was the one place he bought a plot of ground with Shechem. And now Jeroboam's settling back into this place. Not the best idea, right? And even though Israel was in control of it then, remember what happened? They never did quite clear out all the Canaanites and the tribes. They were always a thorn in their flesh. We see he caused the golden calves, and he put them in Dan and Bethel. That was the most northern spot of Israel after the divided kingdom, and Bethel was right down near the border, near Judah. So, Jeroboam's idea was, hey, if I don't do something, they're going to go back, because what do we have to do right now? We're supposed to worship in Jerusalem, right? Well, if my people go down there, they're probably going to go back to Rehoboam. So he had an idea. Well, why don't I make some golden calves? I remember one of our great ancestors, Aaron. He had that good idea, right? He made a golden calf. And what did the people do? What did the people do when he made the golden calf? They worshipped it, right? And you think, well, if I'm a true Christian, if somebody come in here and started preaching heresy, what would we do? We wouldn't say, no big deal. Well, I guess through Solomon, he let all this idolatry come into the kingdom. So whenever Jeroboam set up the golden calves, you don't hear an outcry. Big deal. We can worship this God or this God or this God. So they weren't really true Israelites. They may have been an Israelite by name, but they didn't worship the one true God. You don't hear anything about outcry. I mean, we hear a few things where the prophet comes out and preaches. So what do we see with Jeroboam? He makes a pagan altar. His pagan altar was destroyed. His arm was paralyzed, and his son was stricken by God due to his sin. He was defeated in battle by Abijam, and that was a king of Judah, the second king of Judah, and he was stricken with the plague from God. Oh, sorry, from God. From God. It's supposed to be from God up there, and died. And give you a hint. Here's what it could have possibly looked like. They found different golden calves. Some they found setting like this, with like it's setting down, and they have horns and it has a sun between their head, because that was a very indicative of Egypt, where they worshiped the Apis. You ever heard the Apis bull? It was like they worshipped the bull, and they had a sun represent him, so he was supposed to be power, like a sun god almost. So the bull was where they first backslid when they first came out of Egypt. And what happens when they split the kingdom? They turn to the golden calf again. So he put one in both of those kingdoms so that they, to give them a form of worship. You know, people like to be religious. I mean, how many people know really wicked and bad people out there? But most of them, I remember at work one time, it was a Thanksgiving meal, right? They decided to get everybody in our department together for a Thanksgiving meal. And they go, "Hey Barry, could you pray?" And somebody go, "Oh, you want them to pray?" Yeah, of course we want them to pray. And this person cusses and swears and all this stuff. And of course we want them to pray. Right? I mean, you got a form of religion, right? I mean, yeah, but Thanksgiving you got to pray, right? You know, I mean, whatever, you know, I go to sleep at night. Now I lay me down to sleep. I don't remember the rest of it, Lord, but here I am. Right? You know, you have some form of religion, whether it's bad or not, right? You had the second and third king, Nadab. He was a king for 2 years. He was Jeroboam's son, and he was assassinated by a rebel named Baasha. Now, just to get back a little bit with Jeroboam, God said, if you serve me, I will have your kingdom endure forever. But what did Jeroboam do? He instead of listening to what God told him, he said, well, I better come up with my own plans. I mean, imagine, if he would have just served God, though his nation could have went back to Jerusalem, came back up, back down, back up, and his kingdom would have endured. But because he decided his plan was better than God's plan, how long did his lineage last? Him and his son. Two lines. That's not a very big dynasty. It ended with his son. And how long did his son rule? 2 years. 2 years. It just shows you, you know, it's best to listen to God. And I think I mentioned this last semester, or I mentioned it in church. I can't remember when. But if you take up all the time that the good kings ruled and the bad kings ruled, the good kings ruled, there was only 8 of them, and they ruled longer than all the bad kings combined. They ruled 3 times longer on average than the bad kings. And what did I say before? The Bible says, righteousness exalts a nation, but a sin is reproach to any people. So when you look at that, and you think about that, what happens when your wicked. I mean, think of it today. What happens if people live a wild life? Drinking and smoking and drugs. Their life isn't very long typically, is it? I mean, they try to put in everything they can and wind up leaving early. I mean, they think, oh yeah, it's like, remember, when we look at the Bible here, everything is God-centered. When you look at it, it's all for God's honor and glory. We'll see that when we go through the prophets, that everything points towards the temple and God's glory. Even when Solomon prayed, he said, God, I know this house can't contain you. You're just doing it to help to give us a place that we can visibly, go and worship. And nowadays, we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. So how we live, how we walk, what we do, we should take care of our temple. We're going to see where many times these temples were neglected, broke down. And we're going to look at at least 5 revivals in the Bible, in the Old Testament, when God sent revival to the land. And somebody, kids, 8-year-old king that served God and loved God. We see Baasha, the 3rd king. He ruled from 909, and we're going to look at some of these more in depth a little later. From 909 to 885, he ruled 24 years, and you can see where, and it doesn't give much about him. Doesn't talk a lot. And you'll see where it talks about him in Kings and Chronicles. So, like I said, the kings of Israel don't get much of a mention in Chronicles other than how they relate to the kings of Judah. Where kings, you get them, pretty even balanced. Well, matter of fact, Ahab, you get a lot about him. I mean, of course, he was kind of a memorable character, not for good though. And then what happens? He's killed by Nadab, and thus fulfilled Ahijah, the prophet's prediction. And he said he was going to die because of his wickedness. And when we see, if you read through Kings, you're going to hear, let me get a cough drop here a minute. I meant to bring some water with me, but I forgot. We're going to see where it says 20-some times, where it says, and he did that, and he caused Israel sin just like Jeroboam. I think it's 20-some times that he says that. And then, what did Baasha do? He fought with Asa, what people call the first saved king of Judah. He started a revival. We're going to see what he instituted later. He basically, Baasha built a Berlin Wall between Israel and Judah. He tried to build a separation so we can protect ourselves from, before they used to come back and forth. But just think of it like whenever Germany and them fought, what happened whenever Russia and they all came in? They put a wall, they decided to divide Berlin up because that was the capital of Germany. Well, what did Russia do? They built a wall around their half of Berlin to keep people in. I mean, here in America, we have to build walls to keep people out, where a lot of these countries, they have to build walls or put guards to keep people in. We as Christians, we try to win somebody by love, where the Muslims, it's a threat of death. It just shows you the difference between the religions, just the outward appearance of the religion. And God said that his seed was going to suffer the same judgment as Jeroboam, that his seed was going to be wiped out. We have the 4th king, Eli. Just 2 years. He was the son of Baasha, and he was assassinated by a rebel drunken soldier. So what do we have here? 2 dynasties that reigned 2 years, or two dynasties. Jeroboam and his son, Baasha and his son. Just over and over again, you see where the kings are killed. And Zimri. Zimri, we're going to see, he was a fiery guy. He was not your most loved king in Israel. He only reigned 7 days. And he's the one I said that when he realized he was going to lose, he went and set his palace on fire. And that was fulfilled the prophecy. Zimri went and killed Baasha's son, Elah. And that was prophesied, saying that he would suffer the same thing as Jeroboam's line, where he wouldn't have one guy to be able to do something against the wall. And it just shows how God fulfills his prophecy. You would think when these kings hear this and see that God's prophets, when they preached it, that it came true, you would think that would catch their attention. But when we don't want to do something, we can be pretty stubborn, can't we? He was trapped by another rebel soldier in his own palace, and he set the palace on fire. Ruled 7 days. That was a short dynasty. Omri. Now, Omri, he was not a good king, but politically and economically, he was one of their best kings. He stretched the borders where Israel had lost a lot of land up to this point, where he stretched it back further. He was a very good builder. He was a good warrior. He moved his kingdom from Shechem to anybody know where? Starts with an S also. Samaria. On the hill of Samaria. And the thing about Samaria, it's right near the Jezreel Valley. It's a path where it would be very easy to have economic development. I don't know where. I don't know if anybody read in the news. Airport Road is going to have a development there, and I think most of it has to do with the airlines and stuff like that. But they got a grant, and over on Water Lake, if you start to see them clear out some of that land over there, I don't know when exactly it's going in, but they're putting in a airport business development center or something like that. A lot of it to do with aviation. Because we saw them cutting down trees and doing this work. So there's going to be more traffic on Water Lake Road eventually. They got all those houses coming in, but they're going to put in more development over there. So if you haven't heard about it, so Omri was like that. He was developing his country. When he moved to Samaria, he built an ivory palace, put an ivory thrones in there, and he really brought Israel back up to the major power now, where Israel was always lagging behind Judah. Basically, from here on out, for most of the time, Israel is going to be a more dominant power than Judah. Now, sometimes them and Judah are aligned. Sometimes they're at war with one another. But Omri, he makes the league with anybody know who? Well, he does with Sidon, Jezebel's father. So he has his son marry the king of Sidon's daughter, Jezebel. And if you remember anything about Sidon, think of it, Tyre and Sidon, up along the coast. They were the major seaports in the Mediterranean. They were wealthy. And Omri was cashing in on it. So he made like a political marriage alliance. Now, Ahab and Jezebel may have loved each other. I don't know. Or they may have just been concerned about power and wealth and money. Money made in Fort Knox. Marriage made in Fort Knox. Not in heaven, made in Fort Knox. but he was one of the most powerful kings up to this point, and he had his son Ahab marry Jezebel. Ahab. What can we say about Ahab? If I just said, hey, tell me what you know about Ahab. Who would like to go first?
Bad stuff.
Bad stuff. Kim, what do you know about Ahab or Jezebel? Chris, what do you know about Ahab?
Everything is always centered around Jezebel.
Word himself, right? Remember, anybody remember, he wanted a plot of land, remember? And he came down and tried to buy some land from one of the Jews, not Nabo. I'll think of it in a minute. But he wanted to buy his plot of land, and he wouldn't sell it to him. So, well, this is my father's land. He goes back home, and Jezebel, what's the matter with you? Why are you pouting? Why are you laying in bed? It's daytime. Well, Naboth, he said, he won't sell me the land. I'll get it for you. She was a woman of action. At least you can say that for her. She was a woman of action. She called the men of the city, said, hey, have a temple, have a dedication, have a feast, and have him set up in one of the most prominent places. And when he comes in, get some unscrupulous people say that they heard him cursing God and the king. They did. They stoned him to death. And you got your land. You got your garden. And the prophet came to him and told him, said, hey, your blood is going to be dripping in that plot of Naboth. And said, Jezebel, the dogs are going to eat her. And we'll see later that it all came true. He made an alliance with Judah, with Jehoshaphat. Think of him, Ahab and Jehoshaphat are ruling at the same time. Jehoshaphat reigns longer, and what happens with Jehoshaphat? His son marries one of Ahab's daughters. Bad news. He was a godly king, but he made some, let's say, foolish decisions. He was thinking, we're brothers. I mean, he's a Jew, I'm a Jew. We're kin, we're 12 tribes. Even though we may have our differences, we can work it out, right? And remember whenever they were going to go into battle, and all the prophets of Baal saying, hey, you're going to win, you're going to win, you're going to win. He said, well, don't we have a prophet of God here? Well, I got one man, and he doesn't prophesy anything good about me. Well, go get him. And he comes up, hey, you're going to win. Hey, didn't I tell me the truth? He said, okay, here's what happened. God said, how can we get rid of Ahab? He said, well, I'll be a lying, one of the spirits, I'll be a lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets. And they'll say, go up and win, go up and win. And so they did. And he said, his one prophet came and slapped him in the face and said, when did the Spirit speak to you? So we're going to cover that more. We see his Athaliah, his Ahab's daughter that got married to Jehoshaphat's son. We're going to see how she's the one that killed all her grandkids so that she could rule. She missed out on one, so we'll see that in a minute. Oh, sorry, my voice is getting. We see that he also had the idea. We're going to look at him more later. But he also said when him and Jehoshaphat were going to go out to battle, he said, "Well, hey, I tell you what. I want you to get all the honor, all the glory. You dress like a king. Now just dress like a regular soldier." Well, Syria, they were fighting Syria then. Syria said, hey, I want you to only go after, he took 20 of his captains, some of his best men, said, only go after the king of Israel. Well, the battle ensues, and Jehoshaphat, they're coming after me. He runs, and then they realize, hey, that's not the king of Israel. And the Bible says that a soldier, just perchance, let go an arrow, and it struck Ahab. And the Bible says he had him, stood him up in his chariot, so that because if the king died, people are more apt to retreat. They propped him up in the chariot. His blood dripped into the chariot. He died eventually. They take him back home to Samaria, wash his blood, cleaning the chariot up. And what happened? The prophecy's fulfilled where the dogs licked his blood up. Then we're going to see later Jehu, the next king, overthrows him, and he tells the eunuchs, hey, throw her out of there. And they throw her out. Her body gets broken up on the way down on the palace wall. And they go in and have lunch. Well, you got a dead queen laying outside. He said, well, he's starting to regret it. He said, well, she was a queen's daughter. I mean, we should be more respectful. I would want them to respect my wife like that. So they go out, and the only thing they find was her heads and her hands and feet. The dogs had eaten the rest of her body. The street dogs, the one that runs wild in the city. Just fulfilling God's prophecy. They said he would die on battle, but said his blood would be washed. So one prophet, and I can't remember the one prophet's name, Elijah said he would die in battle, which he did. The other prophet said he would have his blood washed out, and they think, well, how can that happen? If I die there, my blood's going to be there, right? Or if my blood's out there, I'm not going to die in the field, right? Well, God worked it out that his prophecies came true by his two prophets. And he was Micah was the one prophet who predicted that he would his blood would be washed from the field of Naboth. The death of Jezebel was predicted by Elijah, and he had for a while when he was not well, he had a temporary remorse, like what they call crocodile tears. Hey, like you ever hear a preacher say, hey, a prisoner say, hey preacher, get me out of this. I'll serve God. If a person gets sick, hey, God, you get me out of this, you bring me back health, I'll serve you. They get better, you never see him again. And he is finally killed in battle by the Syrians, where just happened chance, right? Well, it's like God just sort of directed that arrow. The soldiers just let it fly and happened to kill the king of Israel. What happens then? Ahaziah, he was the 8th king. He only reigned 2 years. He was Ahab's son, and he was the oldest son of Ahab and Jezebel. He persuaded Jehoshaphat to fight with him. You'd think Jehoshaphat would learn, and he entered into a shipbuilding enterprise at Ebion Gezer, and the ships were wrecked. God judged him for doing it, and then he finally said, hey, nope, not enough. He suffered a severe illness, and he died, and he fell into his palace in Samaria. He turned to a pagan god. Remember, he said, hey, he told his wife, said, hey, go ask me if I'm going to get healed. Well, he sent her, and he said, nope, he's going to die. He turned to a pagan god, Beelzebub. You ever hear of Beelzebub, the god of the flies, for healing? He was rebuked by Elijah, and he tried to get him arrested. Anybody remember that story? He sent 4 captains with 50 men. He said, go bring Elijah here. They go to Elijah and said, come with us, man of God. And Elijah goes, or Elisha, he said, if I'm a man of God, may fire strike you from, God strike you with fire from heaven. 50 died. He said, go send another captain, 50 men. They go up, same thing. The last guy, he comes up, falls down, and he said, man of God, please have mercy on me and my men. We're just doing what the king wants us to do. And he got up and went with them. It's always good to have a humble spirit, isn't it? He saw what happened. You wonder if he would have been the first captain to go, if the story would have been the same. But at least you can say one thing about that guy. We don't know his name, but he learned from others. He learned the lesson. He learned He learned by the mistakes of others. The ninth king. Here again, we have the same name. Jehoram, or it can be Joram. Joram. It's pronounced both ways. And you'll see it both ways in the Bible. After that son died, Jehoram was made king. He was the youngest king of Ahab and Jezebel. He persuaded Jehoshaphat to fight against the Syrians. Again, you would think he would learn. And Elijah, the prophet, performed a miracle which helped him win. You remember the story? Israel and Judah and Edom was going to fight against the Syrians. They're out in the field, and God said, hey, you're not even going to have to fight this battle. God's going to fight it for you. And then remember, they had a drought, right? Well, God told them to dig some channels in the field. And God sent rain. And when the Syrians looked across, the sun shining off the water, they thought, that's blood. That's blood out there. They killed one another. Those Israelites and those Jews and those Edomites, they decided to fight one another. Hey, guys, let's just go clean up the spoils. So they don't take any weapons with them. They run into the camp thinking they were just going to be carrying away loot, because you don't want to carry a sword and a shield and your buddy's going to get all the loot. So you drop your weapons, you run in, and what happens? Hey, they don't have any weapons. Let's get them. And God gave them a great victory just because they listened to God. Now you would think Jehoram would say, maybe this God of the Jews knows what he's doing. He blessed us. You would think he would turn to God, but nope, he doesn't. He said, and he was on the throne when Naaman came to be healed. Remember the story of Naaman? Jehoram was the king, and the Syrians, they still weren't done yet. They lost that battle, but now Naaman, they gained their power back. Naaman, what does he do? They already taken away some Jews, some of the Israelites as slaves, and he had a servant girl, which we don't even know anything about. He said, hey, man, the mistress said, if he would go to the prophet Elijah, he could heal him. Now, she's probably a young girl this time. How long she was a slave? Don't know. But she believed in the God of Israel. She said, hey, if Master goes there, he could heal him. So his wife tells Naaman the story and said, hey, I don't have anything to lose, right? He goes to the king and he takes all this gifts and money and prizes and goods, and he goes to the king, and here's a letter from Naaman, the top general of the Syrian army. He just want to pick a fight so he can have a reason to fight us. Fight. And Elisha heard about it and said, hey, send him to me. I'll take care of it. So good. Go to Elijah. He goes there, and he comes to see Elisha, and what happens? The servants come and knock on the door. And tell him to go dip in the Jordan 7 times. Well, the servants go back. Well, where's the prophet? Where's this prophet that's going to do this great miracle over me? Well, he said, go dip in the Jordan 7 times. Wait a minute. Does he know who I am? I am the general of all of Syria. I am second to the king in power. And this low-life prophet, I am going back to Syria. Wait a minute, Master, wait a minute. If he would have asked you to do something great, you would have done it, right? Yeah. I mean, he's not asking, we have better rivers in Damascus. Well, he didn't tell him. He said, dip in that dirty Jordan River over there. Depending on the time of year, it might be cleaner or dirtier. And he may just like the river in Damascus better, and it might have looked about the same, but, he had that Syrian pride, just like I have that Pittsburgh pride, you might have that Washington pride or Dallas pride or whatever, you like your team better. He said, okay. So he goes out, gets in the water, still got this leprosy. He dips down 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. I'm getting out of it. Master, he said 7 times. What do you have to lose? He dips down 7 times, comes back up, he's clean as a baby skin. He goes to see Elijah. Elijah comes out this time. He said, here, let me give you all this as a thank you. No, God did it. I don't want any money. Oh, please take it. No. Anybody know what Elisha wouldn't take it? Anybody know what Naaman asked for? He asked for some dirt. Dirt. Now, I know a pastor, he went to Auschwitz, and he got stones from the concentration camp there. He's been to Israel, and he got stones from the Temple Mount. Well, not Temple Mount. Well, he may have got some from there, but by the Wailing Wall, he got stones there. So he collects dirt, right? And he said, hey, just forgive me this sin. When my master usually gets me to take him into the temple. When he leans on my arm and he kneels there to pray to his God, forgive me, but I will put the dirt from here of Israel in that spot so that when I'm kneeling, I'm really worshiping Jehovah. Just forgive me that whenever I kneel in Baal's temple. And you gotta remember, he's a pagan. He doesn't know much about God, and he takes it, and his servant goes, I believe my master did that. I mean, that's a lot of money. So Gehaziel, he goes running after him. So, hey, my master had some other prophets come. So he needs some stuff for that. Oh, yeah, take what you want. And he gives him money, and what happened? He comes back thinking he got some money, extra cash, under the table. And what happened? Elijah goes, don't you know my spirit went with you? I know what you did. And then the leprosy Naaman had came on Gehaziel, and he took off. So we're going to go ahead and start here, but we're going to see how Jehoram was later finally murdered by Jehu, which cut the line of Omri and Ahabinat. So you see how this just one revolt over another. I mean, you figure they got in a habit, Jeroboam started that habit, and people just kept following through with that habit. So any questions or comments right now?